Let's talk about the coup in Sudan. This guy, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has taken control and kicked out the prime minister. People are really angry. They're back on the streets like they were 2 years ago. That's when they brought down a president they blamed for 30 years of oppression. So what's going on? Who's who in all of this? And where does Sudan go from here? Okay, first, let's wind things back and talk about Omar al-Bashir. He took power in a military coup in 1989 and ruled Sudan for the next 30 years. But 2 years ago, people finally turned on him. Women, young people, Sudanese from across the country had had enough. And when it became clear that al-Bashir's days were numbered, the army, which had propped him up for so long, turned on him too, and he was out. But it wasn't quite the people's victory that all those protesters had wanted, because the army seized power and replaced Bashir with something called the Transitional Military Council, the TMC. So as far as the protesters were concerned, the revolution wasn't over. More than 100 people were killed in what became known as the Khartoum massacre. Still, the protesters kept up the pressure, and it worked. Eventually, the military agreed to share power. So, the military leaders, the TMC, made a deal with the group that basically represented the protesters. That's the FFC, the Forces of Freedom and Change. They agreed to share power for 39 months in a new transitional government and then hold elections. Both sides had seats on a joint committee called the Sovereign Council. That was led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Remember, he's the guy who just led the coup. There was also a civilian cabinet led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Now, for a while, it looked like Sudan was on track and transitioning towards democracy. But that transition was completely derailed by what happened in late October, when General al-Burhan decided to seize power. He dissolved the Sovereign Council, pushed out the Prime Minister, and declared a state of emergency. But why now? Well, that whole power-sharing arrangement was on pretty shaky ground from the start. So that's the context, a major rivalry between the two sides that was just getting worse and worse. But there was something else going on too, a looming deadline for General al-Burhan to step down as chairman of the Sovereign Council. Some people reckon that also helps to explain the timing of this coup. And stepping down would have put the civilian side in a stronger position to make some big moves, like handing over the former president Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. He's facing charges linked to the conflict in Darfur, a conflict that some of those military leaders, like al-Burhan, were involved in too. Or another big move, pushing ahead with a proper investigation into the military's role in the Khartoum massacre. The military has full control now. So what does that mean for Sudan? Well, for the economy, it's definitely bad. Sudan was on its way to getting $50 billion in debt relief, and there were promises of even more international aid. But most of that was tied to Sudan's democratic transition, and now that that's in doubt, so is the money. Now, General al-Burhan actually says he's still committed to that transition. He said the whole reason he took control was to correct the path of the revolution, as he put it, and that the military was forced to act because of all the political infighting. He says he's going to set up a technocratic government and hold elections in 2023. But people just aren't buying it. And so for many in Sudan, it's feeling like 2019 all over again.
الرسالة دار نوصلها للعالم. مش هو الثورة انتمت لبرهان، برهان انتمى للثورة وقال أنا هحمي الثورة. هل بالله عليك دي حماية؟ دي حماية ثورة.
We can't predict what might happen next in Sudan. Several people have already been killed in the protests that followed the latest coup, and there's definitely a lot of fear. But there's also some hope. The idea that people power has changed things before, and it might again.
The people in the street, the people who managed to start the civil disobedience, without any central leadership, but basically their faith in their right to have a government that is held accountable to them. And that tells me that there's just no way we're going to have a military rule in the long term.